A millionaire single dad had tested 25 women in 18 months. 25 dates where he pretended his card declined, where he wore clothes from Goodwill, where he drove a car that barely started. After his ex-wife divorced him and took half his fortune, Theodore Colton made a vow. He would never again be loved for his money. So he faked being broke on every single date. 25 women failed. Some made excuses before the appetizers arrived. Others ghosted him after one dinner. One woman actually laughed in his face when he said he couldn't afford dessert. Then he met Hazel Hernandez, a waitress working double shifts just to keep her little brother alive. A woman who had every reason to walk away from a man with empty pockets. But when Theodore's card declined at their first dinner, Hazel didn't flinch. She pulled out her tip money, still warm from her apron, and paid the bill without hesitation. 3 dates later, she was still there. Theodore was worth $43 million. He owned a tech empire. His penthouse had a view most people only saw in magazines. And Hazel had no idea. Tonight was the final test. If she passed, he would tell her everything. If she failed, he would walk away like he always did. But sitting across from her now, watching her smile despite the exhaustion carved into her face, Theodore realized something that terrified him. What if she passed the test, and then hated him for ever giving it? Before we continue, let us know in the comment section where in the world you're tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories reach. And if this story speaks to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Theodore first saw Hazel on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting alone in his car outside a diner he'd never noticed before. He'd just walked out on date number 23, a woman who'd ordered lobster and champagne, then discovered a family emergency the moment his card declined. He was tired. Tired of the games. Tired of the testing. Tired of the hollow feeling in his chest every time another woman proved his ex-wife right. That love was just another transaction. That everyone had a price. The diner looked like it hadn't been updated since 1987. Cracked vinyl booths, flickering neon sign, the kind of place that probably served coffee in chipped mugs. Theodore almost drove past it. Then he saw her through the window, a waitress with dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, refilling an elderly man's coffee. When the man's hand shook and knocked over his water glass, she didn't sigh or roll her eyes like she'd been on her feet too long. She just smiled. A real smile, the kind Theodore hadn't seen in months, and cleaned it up while asking if he needed anything else. Something about that moment stopped him. Theodore parked his car and went inside. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Each time, he watched her move through the diner with that same patient kindness, even when customers were rude, even when she was clearly exhausted. On his 4th visit, she finally approached his table with the coffee pot. "You keep ordering black coffee and sitting here for 2 hours," Hazel said, a hint of amusement in her tired eyes. "Either you really love our coffee, or you're working up the courage to say something." Theodore felt heat creep up his neck. "Is it that obvious?" "Little bit." She refilled his mug, even though it was still half full. "So, what is it? You selling something?" "Because I can't afford whatever it is." "No, Theodore laughed despite himself. "I wanted to ask if you'd maybe want to get coffee sometime. Somewhere that's not here. Though I understand if your answer is no, given that you probably see enough of coffee at work." Hazel studied him for a long moment, and Theodore wondered what she saw. He'd dressed down deliberately, a faded jacket he'd picked up at Goodwill, old jeans, scuffed sneakers. His usual watch, worth $47,000, sat in his nightstand at home. The wedding ring he'd finally stopped wearing sat in a drawer next to it. "I work 70 hours a week between here and the grocery store," Hazel said carefully. "I've got a 15-year-old brother who needs me. I don't really have time for dating." "Just coffee then," Theodore said. 30 minutes. You pick when and where." She bit her lip, considering. Theodore noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way her uniform was faded from too many washes, the small Band-Aid on her thumb from what was probably a kitchen burn. "Okay," she said finally. "Thursday afternoon. There's a park 2 blocks from here. Bring your own coffee, though. I'm off the clock." Thursday afternoon. Theodore sat on a park bench with 2 gas station coffees and no idea what he was doing. This wasn't supposed to be real. This was supposed to be another test, another way to prove what he already knew about people. But when Hazel showed up in jeans and a sweater that had been mended at the elbow, hair down around her shoulders for the first time, something in Theodore's carefully constructed plan started to crack. "Sorry I'm late," she said, slightly breathless. "Carlos had physical therapy and it ran over." "Carlos?" "My brother." Hazel took the coffee he offered and sat down, leaving a careful distance between them. "He's got a degenerative muscle condition. Some days are better than others." She said it matter-of-factly, like she was commenting on the weather. No plea for sympathy, no heavy sigh, no invitation for him to ask probing questions. Just a fact of her life. "That must be hard," Theodore said quietly. Hazel shrugged. "It is what it is. Our parents died in a car accident 3 years ago. I'm all he's got." She took a sip of coffee and made a face. "God, this is terrible. Why did I suggest bringing our own?" Theodore laughed, surprised by her ability to shift the mood. "I thought it was pretty bad too, but I didn't want to insult your recommendation. I work at a diner. I have no excuse for bad coffee recommendations." Hazel smiled, and Theodore felt that crack in his chest widen. "So, what about you? What's your story, Theodore?" He'd rehearsed this part. The lies came easily now after 25 practice runs. "I work in tech support. Live in a small apartment across town. I've got an 8-year-old daughter, Matilda. Joint custody with my ex-wife." "That must be hard too." Hazel echoed his words back to him. "The custody thing." Theodore looked down at his terrible coffee. This was usually where he deflected, kept things surface level, maintained the character he'd built. But something about the way Hazel had shared her own burden so simply made him want to be honest. Or as honest as he could be, while still lying about everything that mattered. "My ex-wife remarried," he said. "Someone with more money, more status, more of whatever it was I wasn't giving her. The divorce taught me that people leave when things get hard, or when someone better comes along." Hazel was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry that happened to you." "It's fine. It was 2 years ago. That doesn't mean it doesn't still hurt." Theodore looked up, startled by the simple truth of that statement. How many people had told him to move on, get over it, that he was better off without her? How many times had he pretended the betrayal didn't still wake him up some nights? "No," he admitted. "I guess it doesn't." They sat in comfortable silence, drinking terrible coffee and watching kids play on the swing set across the path. Theodore couldn't remember the last time silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. "So, what made you ask me out?" Hazel asked suddenly. "I'm not fishing for compliments. I'm genuinely curious. You don't seem like the kind of guy who usually hangs around diners." Theodore chose his words carefully. "I watched you help that old man when he spilled his water. You were kind to him. Really kind. Not just customer service kind. I don't see that very often. Hazel looked embarrassed. That's just being a decent human. You'd be surprised how rare that is. She met his eyes then, and Theodore saw something in them he hadn't expected. Recognition. Like she understood exactly what he meant. Like she'd been disappointed by people too. Yeah, Hazel said softly. I guess I wouldn't be that surprised. Their 30 minutes turned into an hour, then 2. Hazel told him about Carlos's small victories. How he'd managed to hold a fork by himself last week. How his physical therapist thought the new medication might be helping. Theodore told her about Matilda's obsession with astronomy. How she made him lie on the living room floor and point out constellations on the glow-in-the-dark stars she'd stuck to the ceiling. He didn't tell her the ceiling was 14 feet high in a penthouse worth $8 million. He didn't tell her Matilda's school cost $60,000 a year. He didn't tell her that the small apartment he supposedly lived in was actually an entire building he owned as an investment property. When Hazel finally checked her phone and jumped up with a curse, apologizing because she had to get to her evening shift at the grocery store, Theodore felt something close to panic. Can I see you again? The question came out more desperate than he'd intended. Hazel hesitated, slinging her bag over her shoulder. I don't know if that's a good idea. Why not? Because I can't afford to date someone right now, Theodore. I mean that literally. Every dollar I make goes to Carlos's medical bills or keeping a roof over our heads. I can't do dinners or movies or whatever normal people do. And you seem nice, so I don't want to waste your time. Theodore's mind raced. This was perfect, actually. She just handed him the exact setup he needed. A woman who couldn't afford anything, who wouldn't expect him to spend money, who would be the ultimate test of whether someone could love him without wealth. But the words that came out of his mouth surprised him. What if we just do this? Parks, bad coffee, talking. I'm not exactly rolling in money either. Hazel studied his face, searching for something. Theodore held his breath. Okay, she said finally. Yeah, let's do this again. As Theodore watched her walk away toward her second job of the day, he told himself this was still just a test. He almost believed it. Their second date happened on a Sunday evening at a small Italian restaurant Theodore had chosen specifically for this moment. Not expensive, but nice enough that the bill would matter to someone living paycheck to paycheck. Nice enough to make the test count. Hazel showed up 10 minutes late, slightly breathless and apologetic. Sorry, Carlos had a bad day. Took longer to get him settled than I thought. Is he okay? Theodore asked, and was surprised to find he actually wanted to know. Yeah, just one of those days where his muscles don't cooperate. He gets frustrated. She slid into the booth across from him, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She'd changed out of her work uniform into a simple blue dress that looked like it had been thrifted. But his nurse is with him now, so we're good. They ordered. Hazel chose the cheapest pasta on the menu despite Theodore's encouragement to get whatever she wanted, and fell into easy conversation. She told him about a customer who'd left a $50 tip that morning, how she'd almost cried in the walk-in freezer because it meant she could buy Carlos the science textbook he'd been wanting. Theodore's chest tightened. He could have bought 1,000 textbooks without blinking. Instead, he nodded and said, "That's amazing. He's lucky to have you." When the check came, Theodore executed his plan. He pulled out his wallet, made a show of checking inside, then let his face fall into practiced embarrassment. Oh no. He patted his pockets, checking his jacket. I thought I grabbed my debit card this morning, but I must have left it at home. I'm so sorry, Hey, it's okay. Hazel was already reaching for her purse. Happens to me at least once a week. I've got it. Theodore watched her pull out 2 20s, probably tip money from the diner, and hand them to the waitress. No hesitation. No disappointment flickering across her face. No sudden need to leave early. She just smiled at him like it didn't matter at all. I'll pay you back, Theodore said, hating himself a little. Don't worry about it. You can get the next one. Hazel stood, gathering her coat. I should get going anyway. Early shift tomorrow. As Theodore drove home that night to his penthouse, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, and his daughter asleep in her bedroom that was bigger than most studio apartments, he told himself he felt triumphant. Hazel had passed another test. So why did he feel sick? Their third date was a walk through the city, because Theodore's car had broken down. Another lie, another test. His actual car, a Tesla Model S, sat in his private parking garage while he drove the beat-up Honda Civic he'd bought specifically for this charade. I don't mind walking, Hazel said when he apologized for the third time. I walk everywhere anyway. Gas is expensive, and the bus system here is actually pretty good. They walked for 2 hours, weaving through streets as the sun set and the city lights flickered on. Hazel told him about her parents. How her mom used to sing while cooking dinner. How her dad would read Carlos bedtime stories in different character voices. I tried to do the voices like he did, Hazel said quietly. But I'm terrible at it. Carlos laughs anyway, which I think is more out of pity than anything else. Theodore found himself telling her things he hadn't told anyone. About how Matilda had nightmares after the divorce. How she'd asked him if Mommy left because she didn't love her anymore. About the guilt that ate at him every time he worked late. Every time he missed a school event, every time he felt like he was failing at the one thing that truly mattered. You're not failing, Hazel said firmly. They'd stopped walking, standing under a streetlight on an empty corner. Matilda's loved. That's what matters. Trust me. As someone who's raising a kid, it's not about being perfect. It's about showing up. You show up for Carlos every single day, and you show up for Matilda. Hazel held his gaze. Stop being so hard on yourself. Something shifted in that moment. Theodore felt the carefully constructed walls he'd built start to crumble, and it terrified him. This was supposed to be a test, a way to prove that people were predictable, that everyone had a breaking point, that his ex-wife had been right about human nature. But Hazel kept not breaking. Their fourth date was coffee at the park again. Their fifth was a free outdoor concert where they sat on the grass, and Hazel fell asleep on his shoulder during the second half. Theodore sat, perfectly still for 45 minutes, afraid to move and wake her, thinking about how she worked 70 hours a week and probably hadn't had an uninterrupted night's sleep in years. By their sixth date, Theodore was in trouble, and he knew it. They were at a street fair, walking past booths selling handmade jewelry and overpriced lemonade. Matilda had begged to come along. She'd been asking about Daddy's friend for weeks, and Theodore had reluctantly agreed after getting Hazel's permission. Watching Matilda and Hazel together made Theodore's throat tight. Hazel didn't talk down to her or do that weird adult voice people used with kids. She just talked to Matilda like a person, asking about her favorite planets and listening intently to an 8-year-old's rambling explanation of black holes. Can Hazel come to my school play? Matilda asked as they shared a funnel cake. Please, Daddy. She said she likes theater. Theodore looked at Hazel, expecting her to make an excuse. Instead, she smiled. When is it? Next Thursday at 7. I work until 6, but I can make it work. Hazel caught Theodore's eye. If that's okay with you. It wasn't okay. It was the opposite of okay. Because Theodore was falling for someone he was actively lying to. And every day the lie got bigger and harder to maintain, and he had no idea how to stop it without losing everything. Yeah, he said. That would be great. That night, after dropping Matilda off at his ex-wife's house and driving home alone, Theodore stood in his penthouse living room and looked at the life he'd built. The furniture that cost more than most people made in a year. The art on the walls. The view of the city stretching out below him like a kingdom he'd conquered. None of it meant anything. He thought about Hazel in her small apartment with the mended sweater and the tip money carefully saved for her brother's textbook. He thought about how she'd offered to pay for dinner without a second thought. How she'd fallen asleep on his shoulder because she trusted him. How she'd talked to Matilda like she mattered. Theodore pulled out his phone and stared at his assistant's number. One call. That's all it would take. He could have a background check on Hazel within hours. Could verify every story she told him. Could confirm she was who she said she was. Could prove this was all real. His finger hovered over the call button. He put the phone down. Because if he checked, if he verified, if he turned this into just another transaction, then he was no better than his ex-wife. No better than all the people who taught him that love was just another thing you could buy or sell or negotiate. Hazel showed up to Matilda's play on Thursday, wearing the same blue dress from their second date. She'd clearly come straight from work, her hair still up in its Waitress bun, and she'd brought Carlos with her in his wheelchair. Theodore's heart stopped when he saw them in the audience. He'd told himself this was still controlled, still a test he could walk away from. But Carlos was here. Hazel had brought her brother, the person she was sacrificing everything for, to meet Theodore's daughter. That meant something. That meant she was letting him into her real life, the parts that mattered. After the play, Matilda insisted they all go for ice cream. Theodore's mind raced as he calculated the cost for 5 people, wondering if he should forget his wallet again or if that would be pushing too far. My treat, Hazel said before he could speak. Matilda was amazing tonight. We're celebrating. Hazel, you don't have to. I want to. She was already heading toward the ice cream shop, pushing Carlos's wheelchair with one hand and holding Matilda's hand with the other. Besides, I actually got a raise this week. 25 cents an hour, but still, big money. She said it like a joke, but Theodore heard the pride underneath. 25 cents an hour mattered when you were counting every dollar. They sat outside the ice cream shop, the 5 of them crowded around a small table. Matilda and Carlos were deep in conversation about some video game. Theodore's ex-wife, Jennifer, was checking her phone with barely concealed impatience. And Theodore sat there watching Hazel lick chocolate ice cream off her thumb, laughing at something Carlos said, looking more beautiful than any woman he'd ever seen in a designer dress. She's really great with kids, Jennifer said quietly, nodding toward Hazel. Where'd you find her? A diner, Theodore said. Well, she's good for Matilda, I can tell. Jennifer stood, gathering her purse. Come on, sweetie, we need to get going. After they left, it was just Theodore, Hazel, and Carlos. The night had turned cool, and Hazel shivered slightly in her thin jacket. Here. Theodore started to take off his coat. I'm fine, Hazel protested, but he draped it over her shoulders anyway. Carlos grinned. You guys are cute. It's disgusting. Carlos. Hazel's face flushed. What? It's true. Carlos looked at Theodore with a brutal honesty only teenagers possessed. You make my sister smile. She doesn't smile enough. So thanks, I guess. Theodore felt something crack completely open in his chest. Not the careful crack he'd felt before, the one he could still control. This was a full break, messy and irreparable. "Carlos, you're embarrassing me," Hazel muttered. "Good. You embarrass me all the time." Carlos wheeled himself a few feet away, giving them space. "I'm gonna look at that bookstore window. Come get me when you're done being gross." Hazel laughed, shaking her head. Then she looked at Theodore, and her smile softened into something more serious. "Thank you for tonight. For including Carlos. Most guys I've dated, back when I had time to date, they didn't want to deal with a brother in a wheelchair." "Most guys are idiots," Theodore said. "Yeah." Hazel moved closer, close enough that Theodore could smell her shampoo, something simple and clean, probably from the dollar store. "You're not like most guys, are you?" Theodore thought about his penthouse, his company, his bank account, the elaborate lie he'd constructed around himself. "No," he said quietly. "I'm really not." Hazel kissed him then, soft and careful, like she was asking a question. Theodore kissed her back, tasting chocolate ice cream and knowing with absolute certainty that he was about to destroy the best thing that had happened to him in years. Because he couldn't keep lying to her. Not anymore. Not when she looked at him like he was worth something beyond his bank account, worth something real and true. But he couldn't tell her the truth either. Because the truth meant she'd know he'd been testing her, manipulating her, lying to her for weeks. There was no good way out of this. As Theodore drove home that night, he made a decision. Tomorrow, he would tell Hazel everything. He would confess, apologize, and accept whatever happened next. Even if it meant losing her, especially if it meant losing her. Because that's what you did when you actually loved someone. You told the truth, even when it cost you everything. Theodore didn't sleep that night. He sat in his home office, staring at his phone, rehearsing the words he'd say to Hazel. Every version sounded worse than the last. "I'm sorry, but I've been lying to you. I'm actually a millionaire. Remember how I pretended to forget my wallet? That was a test. Everything you thought you knew about me is fake." By morning, he drafted and deleted 17 text messages asking her to meet him. Finally, he just called. "Hey," Hazel answered, sounding tired. "Everything okay? You never call this early. Can we meet today? It's important." A pause. "Theodore, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "I just need to talk to you, please." "Okay. The park? Around 2? "Yeah. Thank you." After he hung up, Theodore sat in the silence of his penthouse and wondered if this would be the last time she'd agree to see him. At 1:30, Theodore was already at the park, sitting on their usual bench. He'd changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on the same worn jacket and jeans he always wore around her. It felt wrong now, like a costume he couldn't wait to take off. Hazel arrived exactly at 2, and Theodore's heart seized at the sight of her. She was wearing her work uniform, clearly coming from a morning shift. Her hair was falling out of its bun, and she had that exhausted look he'd come to recognize. But she smiled when she saw him, that genuine smile that made him feel like the worst person alive. "Okay, you've got me worried," Hazel said, sitting down beside him. "What's so important?" Theodore took a breath. "Just say it. Just tell her." "I haven't been honest with you." Hazel's smile faded. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Theodore forced himself to look at her. "I'm not who you think I am. I don't work in tech support. I own a tech company, a successful one. And I don't live in a small apartment. I have a penthouse downtown, and my car didn't break down, and I didn't forget my wallet, and I'm not struggling financially. Hazel stared at him, her expression unreadable. I don't understand. I'm a millionaire, Hazel. I have been this whole time. Everything I told you about my finances was a lie. The silence stretched between them like broken glass. Theodore watched emotions flicker across Hazel's face, confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked like hurt. Why? Her voice came out small. Why would you lie about that? Because I wanted to know if someone could love me for who I am, not what I have. The words tumbled out faster now. My ex-wife cheated on me with my business partner. She left me for someone with more money, more connections. The divorce taught me that people only care about what you can give them. So I started testing women, pretending to be broke on dates, seeing who would stay. Testing. Hazel repeated the word like it was foreign. You were testing me? Yes. No, I mean... Theodore ran his hand through his hair. At first, yes. But then it became real. You became real. And I didn't know how to stop lying without losing you. Hazel stood up abruptly. I need to think. Hazel, please. No. She held up her hand, and Theodore saw it was shaking. You let me pay for dinner, with my tip money. Money I needed for Carlos's medication. You watched me worry about whether I could afford gas, whether I could take an afternoon off work. And the whole time, you were... what? Taking notes? Seeing if the poor girl would pass your test? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Theodore? Hazel's voice cracked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you played games with someone who didn't have the luxury of playing games back. Theodore felt panic rising in his chest. I know I messed up. I know I should have told you sooner. But everything else was real. The way I feel about you, the way I feel about Carlos, the conversations we had, that was all real. How am I supposed to know what's real? Hazel wrapped her arms around herself. You lied about everything. For all I know, you lied about having feelings too. I didn't. I swear I didn't. I don't know if I can believe you. Hazel's eyes were filling with tears, and Theodore had never hated himself more. I thought you understood me. I thought you knew what it was like to struggle, to worry about money, to feel like you're barely keeping your head above water. But you were just pretending. You were a tourist in my life. That's not fair. Fair? Hazel laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair? I work 70 hours a week to keep my brother alive. I haven't bought myself new clothes in 2 years. I ate cereal for dinner last week because I had to choose between feeding myself and paying for Carlos's physical therapy. And you were playing dress-up in Goodwill clothes and watching me, like I was some kind of social experiment. Hazel, I need to go. She was already walking away, moving fast. I need to think. Don't call me. Theodore watched her leave, every instinct screaming at him to chase after her, to fix this, to make her understand. But he stayed on the bench because maybe that's what he deserved. To sit alone with the consequences of his choices. 3 days passed. Theodore called twice. Hazel didn't answer. He texted. Nothing. He showed up at the diner, but her manager said she'd called in sick. Matilda noticed immediately. Where's Hazel? Is she coming over this weekend? I don't think so, sweetheart. Why not? Did you have a fight? Something like that. Did you apologize? Theodore looked at his 8-year-old daughter, who somehow understood relationships better than he did. I tried. Try harder, Daddy. That's what you always tell me to do. On the 4th day, Theodore's assistant knocked on his office door. "Sir, there's someone here to see you." "A Hazel Hernandez? She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's personal." Theodore's heart stopped. "Send her in." Hazel walked into his office, and Theodore saw her take in the space. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the expensive furniture, the view of the city. She looked small standing there, still in her diner uniform, surrounded by evidence of everything he'd hidden from her. "So, this is your real life?" she said quietly. "Yes." "It's nice." Hazel walked to the window, looking out at the skyline. "I've never been this high up before. You can see everything from here." Theodore didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. "I've been angry at you for 4 days," Hazel continued, still looking out the window. "Really, really angry. I told Carlos what happened, and he said you were a jerk who didn't deserve me. He's probably right. He is right. But then I kept thinking about something." Hazel turned to face him. "You told me the truth. You didn't have to. You could have kept lying, and I never would have known. But you told me anyway, even though you knew I'd be angry. Even though you knew it might end things. I couldn't keep lying to you." "Why not? You'd done it for weeks already." "Because I love you." The words came out raw and honest. And lying to someone you love isn't love at all. It's just another kind of using them. Hazel's eyes filled with tears again. "You hurt me, Theodore." "I know. I'm so sorry. I don't know if I can trust you again." "I know. But I want to try." Hazel wiped at her eyes. "I must be crazy, but I want to try. Because the truth is, I fell in love with you too. The real you, underneath all the lies. The guy who listens when I talk about Carlos. The guy who makes Matilda laugh. The guy who kisses me like I'm the only person in the world." Theodore crossed the space between them in 3 steps, pulling Hazel into his arms. She let him, burying her face in his chest. "I don't care about your money," she said, her voice muffled. "I never did. I care that you didn't trust me enough to just be yourself. I was scared." "I know. I'm scared too." Hazel pulled back to look at him. "But if we're going to do this, no more lies. No more tests. Just us, figuring it out together." "Just us," Theodore agreed. "I promise. And you're paying me back for all those dinners." Theodore laughed, the sound breaking through the tension. "Deal." Hazel smiled then, tentative but real. "Also, Carlos wants to meet the real you. Fair warning, he's going to give you so much grief about this." "I deserve it." "Yeah, you do." Hazel kissed him softly. "But you're going to make it up to us? Both of us. However long it takes." 6 months later, Theodore stood in his kitchen making breakfast while Matilda and Carlos argued over what to watch on TV. Hazel was curled up on the couch with a medical journal, researching new treatments for Carlos's condition. She'd cut back to 40 hours a week at the diner. Her choice, because she liked the work and the people. But now she actually had time to breathe. Theodore had set up a trust for Carlos's medical expenses. Not because Hazel asked, she hadn't. But because it was the right thing to do. Because family took care of family, and somehow, against all odds, they'd become a family. "Daddy, Carlos says space is boring," Matilda announced indignantly. "I said black holes are boring," Carlos corrected. "The rest of space is cool. Black holes are the coolest part." Theodore caught Hazel's eye from across the room. She was smiling, the exhaustion he'd first noticed gone from her face. She looked happy. She looked home. "I love you," Theodore mouthed. "I know," Hazel mouthed back, her smile widening. "It wasn't perfect. They still had arguments about money. Hazel hated when Theodore tried to buy her expensive things, said it made her uncomfortable. They still had hard conversations about trust, about the lies that had started everything. Some days were harder than others, but it was real. Finally, completely real. And that was worth more than any test Theodore could have designed. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Here's a question for you. Do you think Theodore was justified in testing Hazel? Was he protecting his heart? Or did he cross a line? And for the ladies watching, be honest. If someone you loved admitted they'd been testing you like this, could you forgive them? Drop your answers in the comment section below. We want to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to Soul Story for more tales about love, trust, and second chances. Hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Thanks for watching.